Hello and welcome to a constructive look at infrastructure in Canada. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Adam Freill. I'm the editor of Onsite Magazine, and I will be acting as the panel moderator during the 60-minute discussion that aims to provide us with an informative snapshot of Canada's infrastructure sector and how critical it is to our nation's economic well-being. Today's title sponsor is LBX Company. Famous for its link belt line of machinery, LBX develops, markets, sells, and supports excavators, forestry equipment, and material handlers. Headquartered in Lexington, Kentucky, LBX has dealers throughout Canada, the United States, and other areas of North and South America. I encourage you to visit the LBX website or to visit one of their dealers to check out their equipment lines, and I thank them for sponsoring today's panel discussion. Before we get started with our panel, I do have a few little housekeeping notes that'll help navigate today's session. You, the audience, you'll be in listen-only mode. You'll be able to choose between either seeing a full screen of the person who's speaking or panel view, where you'll be able to see all of our panelists at the same time. So you can select the style you prefer by using the Zoom webinar controls at the top of your window. Today's programming will consist of roughly 45 minutes of our panel discussion, then we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for audience questions. If you have questions, you can type those in at any time using the questions tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll be keeping an eye out for questions during the session, and we'll try to answer as many as time will permit. One thing, there are two different buttons down there. There's a chat and there's a question. Please use the question tab there. And if you want to discuss today's event on social media, please use the hashtag OS infrastructure. So hashtag OS infrastructure to share your thoughts. It's OS for onsite. Today's panel has representatives from a number of key organizations within Canada's construction sector. So I'm looking forward to seeing some great discussion about the importance of infrastructure, as well as some insights into some of the major projects currently being built within Canada's construction industry, and possibly some details about new projects that are in early stages, or earlier stages anyway. I'm going to welcome our panelists to share some notes about where their respective organizations fit into the sector as well, and some of the things that they're doing to help keep construction backlogs in healthy shape going forward. Infrastructure is a critical backbone for the Canadian economy and quality of life, after all. And I do have to make note of a late change to our lineup. The election was called on Sunday, and with that call, we've had to adjust our panel to 3 participants today, but we will explore possibilities of working with the Canadian Infrastructure Council in a future webinar or event. So stay tuned on that front. But with that all being said, and the housekeeping in order, please join me in welcoming today's panelists. Going alphabetically by last name, with us today are Louis-Philippe Champagne of the Canadian Construction Association, Anil Jaswal of Canada Infrastructure Bank, and Lisa Mitchell of the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships. Louis-Philippe, or LP as many of us know him, is the Vice President of Public Affairs and Industry Practices at the Canadian Construction Association. A public affairs professional with over 20 years experience, LP is a trusted advisor at the CCA on issues facing the construction industry. This includes infrastructure, of course, and he works to advance policies that support members in their businesses. Welcome, LP. Anil is the Director of Portfolio Strategy at Canada Infrastructure Bank. In this role, he spearheads the development of new sector opportunities, the investment framework, and public impact assessments. His efforts have been critical in shaping the bank's recent strategies for supporting infrastructure, for housing, and for accessing critical minerals. Welcome, Anil. And Lisa joined the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships as its president and chief executive officer in 2021. She has more than 20 years of leadership, communications, and public affairs experience, including a decade in advocating for and advancing public-private partnerships, or P3s, including serving at Infrastructure Canada as Senior Director, Investments, Partnerships, and Innovation. She's an advocate for Canada's P3 model and market, and has led extensive research initiatives on the model to position Canada as a global leader. Welcome, Lisa. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I'm looking forward to your insights in this critical segment of Canada's construction landscape. With that, I think I'll dive in on questioning here. I know I outlined everybody's experience a little bit with the introductions, but I'd like to allow each panelist to share a little about themselves and their organization. So I'll start with Anil, then we can ask Lisa to jump in, and LP, I'll get you to round everything out. If you don't mind, hit us with a cocktail party style introduction, like a 60-second elevator speech to give us a brief overview of what your organization does, including some of the key work your organization's doing within Canada's infrastructure sector. And keep in mind, we will be diving into finer details as the conversations unfurl. So don't go too in depth. Try and keep to the short intro. So Anil, start us off.
Great. Thanks, Adam, and really appreciate the invite to be here today. So the CIB, or the Canada Infrastructure Bank, we are a federal crown corporation with a $35 billion endowment that we use to invest in infrastructure across the country. Our goal is to get infrastructure built in the public interest, and we typically do this across 5 what we call sectors. So this is things like public transit and other major transit in cities, transportation, rail lines. We do it in power generation, so powering the economy. We do it in broadband infrastructure, so connecting, in particular, rural areas to 5010 internet. We also do it in trade infrastructure, so things like ports, rail, airports, that sort of class. And lastly, we do it in what we call green infrastructure, which is a bit of a catch-all, but it includes things like clean fuel, so hydrogen production. It includes water and wastewater infrastructure for communities, which you use for housing and other social goods. So those are the areas we invest in. The way we invest is a bit different. So we aren't a granting institution. We provide typically loans, sometimes equity investments. And so we get paid back over time. And I think that's a really powerful tool. That part of what makes us unique. We invest alongside private partners in the infrastructure that's needed. So we don't do the building, it's our private partners. And so we get paid back. We're now covering our operating costs with the revenues we generate. And so hopefully delivering a sustainable model to get more built in Canada. Maybe briefly, my role here is to think about where we invest and how we invest. So you mentioned, for example, critical minerals. That was a growing area in the last few years. How do we support that? We're now starting to fund the power lines, the roads, all the things that you need to actually unlock those areas of economic development. We think about new areas around housing, think about other energy goods that might happen in the future. We continue to explore ways that we can help grow the economy through infrastructure.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll pass the microphone over to Lisa.
Thanks so much, Adam, and thanks so much for having me. And just to introduce myself, I've got about 15 years in this space and in the public-private partnership space, as you indicated. And I think it's really a fascinating space to be in. And taking over and at the helm of the Canadian the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships. It's a 30-year-old organization. I've been in the role for about almost 3.5, 4 years now. It's a bit unique in the membership-driven organizations space in that we represent virtually all major players in the infrastructure sector. We represent leading construction, engineering, legal, advisory firms, the banks and the financiers, as well as the operators and the facilities maintenance folks. What makes us a bit unique, though, is that we also represent the public sector owners. So the federal government, the provinces, territories, and the municipalities. What that brings to the table for us is an ability for us to collaboratively, both public and private, work together on advancing the public-private partnership model and finding opportunities to support government objectives. So us as a council, first and foremost, we're focused on helping governments build resilient infrastructure. And we do that through demonstrating the important role that the P3 model can play in meeting objectives, whether that's long-term operations and maintenance to supporting asset management, leveraging private capital. We also work to evolve the P3 model. So we work with industry to harness the lessons learned. We adapt the model and also help support a very large maturing portfolio of projects. Some of the things that we've done is a recent release of a policy primer in August of last year that sort of helps to sort of put a marker in the sand about what P3s are, where they're working. But we're also continuing that work to look at expanding the umbrella. So rooted in leveraging capital, what are the other opportunities? And with some of that, that links to growing the industry, which is sort of our third area. We work to sort of adapt the model into new asset classes, new jurisdictions, as well as finding new opportunities to grow new P3 talent as well too. And we've been doing quite a bit of work. I'd say one of our fastest growing areas now is the municipal sector. We launched a municipal engagement advisory group about a year, 18 months ago, released a set of tools in the fall to help support municipalities, and are currently about to launch our third of six in a 6-part webinar series to help municipalities leverage the use of another tool in the toolbox to help them build the infrastructure that they need.
Excellent. Thank you. LP,
Thank you, Adam,
tell
and
us
thank
about
you
CCA.
for
Yes.
thank you for having us. What a great time for that panel discussion. Thank you for putting this together. It's my great pleasure to be here to represent the CCA, the Canadian Construction Association. We are the National Industry Association for Construction in Canada. My responsibility are twofold. I manage our public affairs team and our industry practices. So what does that mean? Our public affairs is, of course, representing the interests of the industry toward the federal government. So we are the main advocate for all things construction in Ottawa. And our industry practices really look at best practices and thought leadership in construction in terms of delivery model and contractualization. We manage and retail the CCDC document as part of that. So we're always looking at ways where the industry is evolving and transforming itself, gathering that best practices and sharing it through white paper, report, and bulletin. The CCA is a sizable organization. We have 18,000 members across the country. They are member through our integrated structure. There's 57 associations across Canada, some of them at the municipal level, many at the provincial, and their members are our member. We represent the whole spectrum of construction in Canada, so that is both the vertical ICI sector, but also horizontal construction, road builder, heavy civil, as well as the whole process of construction. So we have GCs, trade contractor, we have suppliers, manufacturers that are part of our membership. We really care about this whole spectrum approach so we can really have a better perspective on the entirety of the building process. It's a pleasure to meet with you. As I said earlier, today's is a great timing with the first day of the federal election. We have a lot of hot topic to discuss and looking forward to get into it. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, I did not circle the date thinking this was all going to be upon us for the first day, but here we are. Let's roll with what's in front of us, right? So I'll dive in here with some of the discussion that's happened this past year. There's been a heavy focus on housing enabling infrastructure. Let's face it, we've got a housing crisis. The numbers we keep seeing from CMHC, they all suggest that we need to be adding to Canada's housing stock in significant volume. The reality, though, you can't build houses on an empty field and expect it to work. What's needed when it comes to housing enable infrastructure, and how do we get the shovels in the ground more quickly on these? A lot of the unseen components. It's the sewers, it's the the various utilities and whatnot that they don't often generate the same level of media attention that the homes themselves enable, right? So, Anil, I know I've seen some recent announcements from Canada Infrastructure Bank about certain community projects and that are helping to grow because there's either energy needs, wastewater upgrades, things of that nature. Can we turn to you and just get an example or two of projects your organization supporting to that end, and then we'll go around the horn with this.
Perfect. Yeah, and kind of as Lisa mentioned, the municipal area is also a growth area for us, and an area where I think there's acknowledgement of the need to significantly increase investment. We a couple of years ago, as the housing crisis was starting to really pick up, we took a deeper look at what the needs are in the infrastructure space and housing, and we spoke to municipalities, spoke to cities, and said what's going on. And we found that you have to make these big upfront investments for growth that really doesn't materialize for many, many years. And so let's say a water wastewater plant, that's typically paid back through utility rates, but that takes 20, 30, sometimes more years. And sometimes there's risk for a city that's putting a major capital outlay upfront. And so we looked at that and thought, how can we help? And we've developed a product. It's our new Infrastructure for Housing initiative, where we have a pretty standardized product that municipalities can access pretty low cost financing that shares in the risk of that future development. So we lend into it and we get paid back as that infrastructure is utilized. So as those homes come online, our loans are paid. If that's a bit slower, we get paid back more slowly. If it's faster, which we hope it is, we get paid back more quickly. But we're a partner with the municipality in that. So hopefully it makes it easier for them to make that investment today for that growth that we want to accelerate. Included in that is the water and wastewater. It includes utilities, stormwater, conveyance, transit if that's really needed to unlock a new neighborhood, for example, densify an area in an urban center. And maybe I'll just give you two examples of this that we've recently closed. So one is a project in Manitoba, so outside of the major urban centers, but medium-sized towns in Brandon and the RSR municipalities in the area. They looked at their housing growth and they said, we're growing really fast. There's a lot of housing demand coming from the city to come out here, but we don't have the water. The water treatment site is at capacity. And so we helped them look at that and said, look, we'll co-invest with you. We put in about $140 million. The project itself is several hundred million more than that. And that's going to unlock about 15,000 new housing units in that area that are constrained by the existing water capacity. So that's an example of how this can operate. Now that's a recent project that we've announced. Another one is with Indigenous communities, which are also often infrastructure constrained. So we have a partnership with Grasswood community, Grasswood Wastewater Treatment Facility, which is English River First Nations. This is near Saskatoon. So this is a smaller project, about 35 million total project cost, but it's going to help the community grow, and it's serving actually the nearby municipality. So it's quite a cool project in that it's serving both the First Nations community and nearby municipalities that can also benefit from that capacity and grow as they're trying to.
Awesome. Thank you. And I like the fact you've given us some examples that aren't just, the GTA, where, the largest population centers either. So like Montreal or Vancouver, there's potential for it to happen everywhere, right? So, LP, would you mind discussing some of the need for housing enabling infrastructure and the steps that could help CCA members and members of its partner associations build such assets? Like that's one of the things about CCA with so many organizations involved. There are so many different facets and angles and whatnot. But
yeah, very much. And the reality from a member to another and from a region to another is quite different when it comes to housing and the housing infrastructure we need. So if you allow me, I'd like to go a few steps back, just back to the root of the problem, the reason why we have a housing crisis to begin with. And there's a few things that Canadians in government from all party agrees. The price of home is too high compared to the price or the available incomes of Canadian. What happened in 20 years, from 2005 to 2025, the average income has doubled. Our disposable income is now an average 64,000 per individual in Canada. Meanwhile, the price of home have tripled, and that discrepancies made it more challenging for new owners to get into the market. There's an agreement on that. The CMHC said in order to bring that price down, the only real solution is to change the supply. It's not a matter of demand, it's a matter of getting more home on the market. We need to build 5,000 more homes, give or take, in Canada between now and 2030, just to match the demand that we have across the country. So this brings the question, how do we do this? And that's where there's a disruption in terms of agreements between political party, provinces, and federal and whatnot. The fundamental problem comes down to housing starts. In Canada, we can build about 250 homes a year on a good year. Our best year so far was 254, and that was in 1974. It's been a long time since we haven't matched that number. In order to increase that housing start, a number of things need to happen. We need to have the workforce to build it. We need to have the procurement process to be efficient in starting that. And then last but not least, we need infrastructure to support it. I really like how you approach this in introduction. You can't just build a home in a field. You need street to get there. You need sewer and water main to get to the house. You need utility. You need school in that new neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. And this is really where CC has been banging its drum for 2 years now with the government to say, hey, it's great that you have a housing plan. It's great that you're putting funding together to say, we'll promote different type of housing in different sort of city. But fundamentally, if municipality cannot expand their housing park because they don't have that new neighborhood or the capacity to transform that single unit in multi-unit, this is where the problem is. And in Canada, there's a significant underinvestment in infrastructure that we've been suffering for many decades at this point, not just in housing infrastructure, but now it is very apparent that the housing is suffering from it. And we won't be able to solve this until we tackle how do we fund municipalities so that they can themselves invest in their infrastructure? There's nobody out there that says, oh, we shouldn't invest in water treatment plant. It's well understood that it's the government responsibility to have good potable water in municipality. The problem is, where do we find the money? I come from a small town in Quebec, Thetford Mines. We just had a new water plant built a few years ago. So now that they have to grow their housing, they are in a good spot because it was just invested in. They're good for 50 years. Everything is great. But if you look at the city of Lévis in Quebec, or Chelsea or Gatineau, or many cities across Canada suffering with the same problematic, maybe their plant was coming to be redone or upgraded in 5-10 years time, and now they're struggling with the idea that A, they have aging infrastructure, and B, they're asked to increase their demand. How do we fix this? Well, we need to rethink how we finance municipality and what's the role of all governments and the public in how we tackle this.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, and then Lisa, are there any notes that you'd like to add on the housing enabling front?
Yeah, I mean, I think my colleagues have mentioned quite a bit. I mean, but we are starting, with an infrastructure gap in this country. And that we can't forget that not only are we trying to build new to enable more housing starts and new communities, but the existing ones are already maybe a little bit behind the eight ball. And I think that's why, for us in the Canada Infrastructure Bank, why I think we're seeing such growth and such interest at the municipal level in thinking creatively and innovatively. And I think, LP mentioned this as well too. If there is not government funding, or there's only so much government funding, how do you think differently about leveraging other forms of capital, whether it be leveraging private capital, partnering with the CIB, to find different ways of doing things? And I think that that's a real opportunity for our industry. I mean, we have more than a portfolio of 300 plus P3s across the country. About 50 or so are municipal projects, and that's across Canada, from Ontario, BC, Alberta, and other places. And it includes things like water, wastewater, energy from waste, transportation, transit, social infrastructure like libraries and recreation centers. But I think, LP mentioned it as well too. It's not just the municipalities that are going to play a role. We're going to need new schools. That's a provincial jurisdiction. So the provinces need to be at the table in terms of really thinking through what the communities of the future look like. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think people are really looking for creative and innovative solutions, because I think, while grants and contribution programs are wonderful, we've all taken a look at what the economy looks like and what the books look like at the federal level, and I think that we're in a challenging time. So how do we kind of work together to find what those creative solutions are? And I know, in our industry, really looking to work closely with our public sector partners to try and find what those solutions are. And it means adaptability on our part as well too. We have a tried and true P3 model that's been used across Canada in a variety of asset classes. But I think we as an industry also need to think creatively to, not always sort of, one-stop shop solution. There's got to be different ways that we think about it. And so I think that that's a lot of the work that we're doing right now as well.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, I think the message about multiple partners at the table really resonates. It's not a single entity solution is gonna emerge, right? Now, I guess one of the things, and especially right now, given the economic climate, the big elephant in every room, it's always the tariffs and counter tariffs. So I think if we can put a little bit of a focus moving from the housing enabling to our trading partnerships and diversifying that, and that brings us to things like trade enabling infrastructure. LP, I know the Canadian Construction Association has been calling for focused efforts that will help with business and trade. Tell us a bit about the importance of trade enabling infrastructure, including some of the projects that CCA is excited to see moving forward, and perhaps share some details of the kinds of projects that the CCA would encourage going forward.
Thank you. A few years ago, the World Bank has released a report that they do quite frequently, on the world's best trading partner, the country that are best at importing and partnering with us. So Canada, for a long time, for decades, have been in the top 10 of best trading nation in the world. That's how the world sees us. That's how we see ourselves. We have significant amount of natural resource. We have a great manufacturing sector. We have been good partners, especially to the US, but also to Europe and more recently to Asia. Shockingly, though, in their latest report, we fell from the top 10 to place 32nd, right after Azerbaijan. This is a significant decline for Canada, and it raised the question, why? Did we decide it? We want to shelter from the world and be protectionist? No. The problem is our capacity in terms of trade infrastructure is declining. Again, to the same point from housing, we have been underinvesting, so now we pay the price. We've seen it very clearly in the recovery from COVID when the container shortage hit our port very hard, and we had significant challenges bringing goods into the country and exporting. This is even more true now as we are realizing that the relationship with the US is quite fragile. If there's one thing we've learned from the past few months is that the US, while they may remain an important trade partner in the future, especially following the Trump administration, we can't just be dependent to a single trade partner. We need to diversify on both coasts and make sure that we have partner in Asia and Europe that can receive our goods from Canada, but also provide us with the goods we need that we don't have here in Canada. The answer to that, trade infrastructure, in my humble opinion. CC has been arguing for that for quite some time. At a time where the federal government didn't care all that much about trade infrastructure, we launched a program called CTIP, the Canada Trade Infrastructure Plan. This was in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, Business Council, a number of associations across Canada to remind the government that there's a need for trade infrastructure. Interestingly enough, 2 years ago in summer of 23, all premier came together at the Council of Federation and said, hey, that plan is great. We do need to invest in trade infrastructure. And they all co-signed a press release at the end of the council to say we need to invest in trade together. Unfortunately, Ottawa didn't see the value at the time, and that kind of fell true. But now, if we can seize the crisis of what's happening in the US, we clearly have an interest from all parties to say, well, we need to invest in trade infrastructure. This begs the question, how do we do it? Right? The main interest right now is to say, well, we want to buy Canadian. We want to turn away from these US suppliers in many industry, construction being one of them, and say we'll buy more of our own goods done in Canada, our own wood, our own steel. But the fundamental problem is that many of these resources are regional in nature. It's very easy to get steel in Hamilton and near the GTA in general, or some region of Quebec, for example. Not so much if you go all the way west. The same thing is true for wood. Wood is more easily distributed across the country, but a lot of the forestry sector is out west. How do we get these goods from east to west to all the market in Canada? For this, you need significant road infrastructure, significant railroad, ports, airports, name it. And this is where the investment is very much needed for quite some time.
Absolutely. Lisa, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how your organization is I guess, supporting the trade enabling infrastructure side of the business as well. I know we've had some awards from your organization that I was at not too long ago. Talk to us a little bit about what's happening with your organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think, over the 30 plus year history, we've seen plenty of projects in the trade and transportation industry that have been using the P3 model, highways, roads, bridges. There's opportunities in other types of assets as well too, ports and other things. And so, I think you could go back and look at our awards, and you probably see a handful almost every year that might fall into this category of projects that are supporting and enabling our cross-country trade. And I think LP sort of mentioned it, there is a bit of a renewed focus, right? Everybody is sort of thinking there's been a lot of people that I think have been thinking east-west for a number of years now, but I think the situation that we're in has really prompted a broader view of the need for east-west trade, and less on that north-south, although that's of course what's prompting all of this and is top of the headlines. What I think is really interesting, though, is that there's been a lot of talk, and the National Infrastructure Assessment, I think, is going to hopefully be part of this as well too. Is that how do we start to think about trade enabling infrastructure through a systems and networks perspective, not just individual projects? And I think there's a really great opportunity, and I'll use the province of Nova Scotia as a really shining example of this. They've created an organization called the Joint Regional Transportation Agency. Their board consists of the airport, the port, transit, the rail, everybody that is sort of in that systems and network space. And they're really doing an analysis of what the needs are in the region for a certain time period and what that project pipeline might be, and then what an implementation plan might look like. So really looking forward to sort of seeing what the results of that are, because they have brought everybody to the table in terms of what the province needs moving forward. And I think those are the types of things we need to see more of across the country, because things don't operate in silos. They're all connective threads. And and sort of what's going to come in from Nova Scotia is going to have to get through, New Brunswick and Quebec and Ontario as it goes across the country. So I think that's a really great example. Looking forward to what the results of that exercise are in Nova Scotia, and maybe how we can apply that in other places. But lots of opportunity. I mean, we're a big country. Trade and transportation is, at the top of the list of infrastructure needs, I think, now in the future, and, just as it has been historically.
Yeah, it's funny with the trying to work within the various jurisdictions. There's always extra stick handling, to use the hockey phrase, of course, because hey, Canadian. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, and a lot of that really does come down to dialogue and who's around that table. So thank you for sharing that. Anil, any spotlight on projects on the trade side that Canada Infrastructure Bank is supporting, looking at, all of that sort of thing?
Absolutely, and I may have looked like a bobblehead there when Lisa was talking about the systems views. I think that's absolutely what we're seeing. Certainly we need more capacity, and expanding our ports and things is important. It's somewhat more straightforward in many ways. You have sort of identified champions, and it's about making relatively large investments, but it's simpler in some ways. I think moving things more efficiently, making it easier for our exporters and other manufacturers to access those exports, get that value add when they export to other markets, is, I think, more complicated. And what does that mean? It means things like, identifying the port might not be constrained, but it might be there's a railroad in a particular spot that needs twinning, and that's going to allow things to move much more quickly and not be caught up. Identifying those bottlenecks. If you expand one part, where do you expand the other? And as Lisa mentioned, there's some really good stuff underway. I think the next step in that is going to be finding the champions. Adam, you mentioned these projects are multi-jurisdictional. There's private partners, public partners. It's getting leadership to really push those things through and get it done quickly is important. Maybe one project to highlight that around sort of getting value add, and we're investing in a project called Can Export. It's in the port of Prince Rupert. This is in northern BC, so West Coast port. It's been growing really, really rapidly. They actually had an issue where they had a lot of empty export containers. This is actually a problem at many ports in Canada, where we're sending off containers that are empty. So there's tons of export capacity in many ways, but how do you access it? And we invested in a project that is called a transloading hub. Basically, it allows bulk goods to be containerized. And so we have goods from Alberta, for example, plastics and resins that are now adding value to our energy in Alberta, allowing that export in the form of plastics. But you needed this major multi-$100 million investment to actually allow that good to be put onto ships efficiently. And so that's going to allow tens of billions of investment in Alberta, major new exports. And it's sort of a thing where it's an existing port, but it's how we move goods. And that allows specific businesses that have bulk commodities to actually access it and really, really increase their export significantly. So it's those sort of things that we got to work with partners, across partners, to identify and get those kind of projects out there, in addition to the big capacity projects as well.
Adam,
Excellent.
can I jump back in? Just a quick note that I think we should mention. Peter from the Canadian Infrastructure Council couldn't join us because of the election, for good reason, but I think it's worth mentioning first their existence. CCA for quite some time have been advocating for the National Infrastructure Assessment, the NIA, and it was in the back burner for way too long in our opinion, but finally we have the Infrastructure Council that was announced, that was in December, just before the holiday, and their current focus, as requested by the minister, is to look at the challenge of housing and building infrastructure, which we think is a great issue to tackle. But we're really hopeful that in the next phase, and that's what we hear, they may tackle the trade enabling infrastructure, and that would be an important one to look at. The role of an NIA, if you look at what's been happening in Australia and UK, is really to look at the infrastructure need writ large, not just tackle specific aspect of it. So it's great what they're doing on infrastructure right now for municipality and housing, but hopefully in the coming years we'll look at interesting stuff on trade.
Yep, absolutely. It's the big picture thing that I think that's the exciting possibility with that organization. So absolutely. So one of the things, and I'll take the conversation into another infrastructure direction here, is I love the fact there's so many different slivers of the construction pie, and as you dig in deeper, there's always more to discuss. One of those other sectors is on the on the energy side, of course. And I was, the writer in me has to use the pun. What's the electrifying developments on energy, right? So maybe we can take the conversation in that direction. And Anil, do you mind starting us off with some notes about energy-related infrastructure projects that Canada Infrastructure Bank is involved in?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I might even draw a bit of a connection between energy and the last topic on exports. Energy, we need it for our homes. We also need it for our businesses. And in my view, Canada, a lot of our prosperity has come from actually exporting energy, whether that's in the form of aluminum or steel or manufacturing. People talk about data centers now. These are in many ways of exporting the energy that we produce here in Canada. And so I think there's a huge continued opportunity to do that and grow our economy, but also, as you talk about electrifying, everyone's seen the models, doubling, tripling our electricity supply is needed in Canada. We need to connect it better. And in the CIB, this is one of our biggest focus areas. We've invested about $4.5 billion so far. So that's about, I don't know the exact number, 14 or 15 billion of CapEx on power infrastructure in Canada. And that includes basically all the asset classes. It includes nuclear. So we're helping fund the largest nuclear expansion in Canada here in Ontario at the Darlington site. It includes transmission lines. It includes renewable generation, wind and solar. It includes the largest grid-scale battery storage project in Canada. All these things are needed. Each region will have its own, approach to meeting its energy needs, and we're trying to help that. Maybe as one project I'll highlight would be a recent announced project. It's the Wassakanadal transmission lines. This is between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So interprovincial ties, I think, are important. There's often, without getting into too much politics, challenge of jurisdiction of getting these things built. And so anytime we can do that east-west efficiency that Lisa mentioned is really important, especially in energy. We can have that greater resilience when we can rely on other provinces to supply energy to one another. So this is a almost $1 billion transmission line between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. When the wind is blowing in one area, and they can send extra to the other, and vice versa. So it really helps with the resilience in that area and be more efficient as we generate power.
Excellent, thank you. And Lisa, it's funny. I was going to get into this big intro about P3s and Bruce Power and all that, but Anil's already introduced nuclear to the conversation. So talk to us a little bit about P3s on the energy side. It seems to be something that is a large focus, or there's alignment with the model, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think Bruce Power that experience, I think, is a bit of a catalyst for not only how Bruce Power looks at projects moving forward, but can be a catalyst for how the energy sector looks at partnering with the private sector. So I think it's a great shining example of how you can take something and adapt it to a new industry. And I think that's what we're finding. Part of what we did a number of years ago when I first came on in this role was to think about the attributes of P3s. And I, not to get into the nitty gritty of the acronyms that can be used to describe them, but I think, as an industry, we got so tied up in, the acronym and the, specifics around the procurement model. We took a step back and said, okay, what actually is it that we're doing? And when you drill down a P3 to its attributes, life cycle approach, leveraging private capital, transferring risk, harnessing innovation and efficiencies, that opens up the umbrella of what a P3 model can be. And quite frankly, in Canada, we've been quite narrow in our interpretation of what a P3 is compared to our global counterparts. And I think that's what we're seeing in the energy space is we are seeing, P3s by another name, but you're seeing those attributes being applied. And so that, we're taking a look and trying to document that a bit. It's happening already. We just need to kind of put pen to paper to explain it to people in terms of how they can fit into the broader spectrum. So lots of opportunity, I think, for P3 models in the space. And like I said, we're already seeing it in projects. It might just not be, might be under a different contractual name.
Awesome, thank you. LP, any comments on the energy side?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to say on energy. It's we're living in a transformative time, I think, when it comes to energy in general. If you look at just last year in terms of electrification, the Quebec government, through Hydro-Quebec, invested 184 billions in their power grid, right? What we recognize there in Quebec, and it's the same across the country, is that the demand for electricity is growing very fast, in great part because of electric vehicle. If that is to be the future, we'll need to produce and store and manage significantly more electricity across our network. But this also have impact on the built environment. As we build new apartment building and condo complex and whatnot, we need to think about how we integrate these charging station and these very different power requirements across the country. So I think electrification will be a big challenge of the coming few decades, and this is closely tied into decarbonization. Our electricity in Canada is very green. It has been for many years. We are now almost entirely phased out of coal. We have pivoted in many ways to natural gas, and now there's question in Ottawa regarding the clean electricity regulation on whether that's clean enough. And then that begs the question, where do we want to go in that line? Do we want clean energy? Do we want cleaner energy, if I can put it simply? But this is the nice part, the easy one to talk about. The elephant in the room that nobody really want to talk about, especially not in the campaign, is the dynamic with fossil fuel in Alberta. Now more than ever, there's a question around pipelines and how we get our oil out of Alberta. The U.S. market has been our biggest buyer for many years. Now we're seeing some real challenge. Donald Trump says he wants to have a drill baby drill policy and transform their whole crude environment. If that is to be true, then there begs the question: what do we do? Do we export it? Can we move it east? Can we move it west? What's the future of LNG? There's a lot to be done in terms of traditional energy out west that will need to be tackled. So I think in the next couple of years, we'll see some real change and real direction from our respective government in that regard.
Excellent, thank you. The discussions we've been having so far, including some on the cross-border issues and whatnot. The reality, though, is we're in a trade war. And that's going to impact some pricing. But just in general, outside of the trade war, prices over time, due to inflationary pressures and whatnot, they trend upward, right? So costs go up over time. And I guess the question that I've got is, are there concerns that some projects will run into resistance due to fear of cost escalations, especially right now while everything's happening, between the north-south dynamic that we've got going on? Or is the current level of uncertainty something that could actually unlock more public funding for the infrastructure projects that we need? Where's kind of the spectrum of that? And if you don't mind, I'll start with Lisa, and then I'll get LP to weigh in on this.
I mean, I think the cost escalation question is an important one and an important discussion to have, but I think it started long before anything happened south of the border. I mean, we've been contending with this for quite some time. Things have been getting more expensive to build. We are dealing also with labor shortages, and we went through COVID and supply chain disruption. And just when you think you're starting to maybe pick up steam on the other side of all of that, add another layer of complexity onto what it is to build in this country. And we've seen the impact already. We have seen big projects getting broken up into smaller projects. We have seen some projects canceled across the country. And again, this has all started, before any of the discussions with our partners down in the South. So what the impact is, I think that still remains to be seen. I mean, I think there's, the impact on current projects in the market. What does that, what do people need to know and understand that for things that are currently under construction? What does that mean for the future in terms of, the per square footage cost of building something? Are the materials that we can, that we are absolutely reliant on? And I know, we've had conversations with our members about mechanical and electrical, some of the big challenges that we've got in that space that are different than other materials that we might need. What that means, I mean, we're in the middle of a federal election campaign. Who knows where infrastructure will fall into the discussion? I know that as an industry, it's complicated, it's difficult, but we also see that there's a lot of opportunity because of course this new renewed focus on Canada and interprovincial trade and our own energy needs. I think it really has a lot of opportunity, but I think it's going to come with a level of uncertainty in terms of whether there's going to be federal funding on the other side, and how we get these things done. So there's a lot of discussion, and I think it links back a little bit to the conversation we just had about trade and transportation, that systems and networks and the importance of something like the National Infrastructure Assessment to really have a full understanding of what the needs are and how to help governments prioritize. We only have so many people even if the costs go up and there is federal funding, that's great. But do we have the, the actual people to get shovels in the ground and get things built? So there's a lot, I think, at play that is more than just about the impact of tariffs on the cost of projects in this country. So I think it's an ongoing conversation. I know industry wide, we're having conversations about what are the things we can control and adjust and do to collectively as an industry to help support projects moving forward, and what are the things that we are really just out of our control and are, and what's the impact going to be. So that's a bit of a stay tuned on that one, I think, to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that always hit me is when's the best time to plant a tree? It's always 20 years ago, right? So there is that catch up and costs go up over time. So it's so complicated a puzzle right now. But LP, what are your thoughts on where things might land with respect to costing of things, getting more shovels in the ground? And I think Lisa had a lot of very good points, but what can you add to that?
Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Quebec City for the annual conference of the CCA, and I had the chance to speak with many of our member contractors from across the country, different size and part of the industry. And really, the message that I keep hearing from everyone is that they're angry, right? The situation with the U.S. is a lot of disruption. It's a lot of risk. It's a lot of unknown to Canadians in general, especially to construction workers and executive. And the challenge it brings is manifold, right? So to state the obvious, if the White House put tariffs on Canada, this doesn't directly impact construction. We're not an exporting industry the same way as oil and gas or forestry or mining. There's two very significant indirect impact that could be problematic for construction. One of them is economic contraction. If all of our exporting industry see sustained tariff for many months at 25% or something as crazy as that, there will be economic contraction Canada-wide. And this will mean less money in the market for them to have project to expand their capacity or renovate their infrastructure. And as a result, it's less project in the pipeline for construction company. This will potentially lead to contraction as well, and potentially job losses. So that is concerning for many of our entrepreneurs. And the second aspect of it, as Lisa mentioned, is the input cost of material. Construction have been going through some pretty wild time over the past few years in terms of cost escalation, price going up and down and staying up for the most part. What we're facing now is different. The impact of tariff, if the federal government is to respond strongly with counter tariff, as they've been doing so far with their two batch of 30 billions in product that have been counter tariff, and then probably more coming up April 2nd, then the impact can be significant on construction. We have a very integrated supply chain in Canada and the US. A lot of our product come from across the border because we've been in that setup of free market for so many years. It's humble to say, let's buy Canadian. We care about Canadian product. We should support our industry, and we should. But the challenge is pivoting to that Canadian production can take some time. One of the key example is electric product, as Lisa mentioned. You can't import power switch and light switch from Europe or from Asia. They have a very different power regulation there. So if it's not manufactured and produced in Canada, you need to turn to the North American market. The capacity to substitute with Canadian manufacturing is limited and will probably have an impact on price. Same is true for steel. We mentioned it before. Trade infrastructure is lacking. So how do we get our Canadian steel through all of our market across the country, in the territories, out west? This is a challenge. So at some point, contractor will have to do a decision whether they stomach the price of tariff and pay the extra price, or they sustain additional transportation costs, for example. Now, it's worth saying that tariff itself is not the only cost, right? Because there is fundamentally a lot of impact between trade and the cost of the Canadian dollar. So if you keep procuring to the US, despite the 25% increase, there's also an impact on the dollar, but also hidden fees and inflation in the product itself. If you take an example of iron product, a lot of the iron actually come from Canada and is sent to the US, potentially with a 25% tariff or more if there's reciprocal measures. And then when it come back with additional tariff. And that's really where we see a big challenge. We have the challenge of the current contract that our member have with owner, and then the contract to come, the bidding process ahead of us. For current contract, you might have language in your contract, for example, in a CCDC2 for a stip sum contract that says any tariff comes on top of the price. So your 25% is good, but the embedded additional cost in your product will not necessarily be covered by that. And that's where we see a real challenge for contractor that have contract who's been signed 2-3 years ago, asking, well, what does that mean for my bottom line? What does that mean for my capacity to deliver the project? And do I have the capacity now to bid on new project for the year to come with the amount of uncertainty we have? Because what we know already is, despite the few announcement of tariff we've had, the uncertainty of whether there will be tariff or not is really what trigger a lot of uncertainty. It's not so much what's to come, it's what we don't know. And that's what's challenging for us.
Yep, absolutely understandable. Of how do you plan for the unknown? So now looking at the clock, we've only got about 10 minutes or so left. So I'm going to kind of merge. I know we had some plans for other discussions as well, but I'm going to merge what's left in our official discussion and just go around the board, around the panel to get some final comments about overall expectations or mood with respect to the infrastructure in Canada, the construction sector, as far as we're looking at the 12 to 24 months. And if there's a project you want to drop into the conversation as a favorite, go for it. We'll allow that leeway, and then we'll see how much time we've got. We don't have a lot of questions coming in right now, so we'll make a judgment call on the questions on that. So, Lisa, if you don't mind starting us off on what's the crystal ball looking like for 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, and I think it just came out of the last conversation. I think there is a lot of anxiety and concern about what moves forward, but I also do think that the industry does see a lot of opportunity as well. So how do we work collectively to solve the problems that we can, deal with the things that we can't? Because I do think that there's the needs in Canada are already great, as we talked about, in addition to any of the new stuff that might be coming down the pike in terms of government priorities. So I think it's a bit of a balance between that anxiety and what's the future hold, but we think there's actually really great opportunity coming our way. I think that's probably going to largely be the sentiment for the next year or so.
Great, thank you. And Anil, I'll hand the mic over your way.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think as everyone agrees, we need to build more, build it faster. And I think the areas that we're really working hard on right now is the grid, is the power generation, it's the trade corridors, it's sovereignty in the north, which I want to speak to in a second. It's the housing infrastructure we talked about. And it's also Indigenous participation, which we didn't get a chance to talk too much about today, but we have some tools that are really partnering with Indigenous communities who are also key partners in many of these asset categories. The one project I'll highlight, I'll take you up on that opportunity. We're about 79 projects that we're investing in now. And one of my favorites is a small one. And I think it speaks to the moment. It's actually in the Evaluate Settlement region, which is in the Beaufort Delta. So as far north as you can get, basically, on the Arctic Ocean. This is an energy project. It's a natural gas power generation project, actually drawing the gas and then actually powering the community, which currently trucks in diesel from way south in Alberta. It has to hope the ice roads are open, has to make sure that homes are getting heated, you have those emissions. This is actually a project that's with the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation as a partner. It's Indigenous led. It's allowing one of the remote areas of our country to be more self-dependent, and actually I think helps our sovereignty. So it's a project I think is really awesome. I think we need more in the north. It's one of the most challenging areas, I think, to invest in infrastructure there and get that built. But I think there's a lot of energy right now, and so excited for that.
I think anytime the ice roads come into play, it's always an adventure. So, LP, I'll hand the microphone over to you for some final thoughts, and you gave a little bit of a barometer of the feedback that you were getting from the conference. But where do things look to be going?
Well, I'd like to reiterate what Lisa just said. With uncertainty come risk, with risk come opportunity. And I think people really seize this. We are at a place now we need to make some challenging decisions, both as a country and as an industry, but we have good time ahead. I don't want to sound like I'm all pessimistic saying we have a trade war, we have a labor shortage, we're dying. No, there is good thing coming. And to state the obvious, we're on day one of a federal election right now. And, you can believe what you want about politicians and their platform and what's coming out of it. But the reality is, if I look at when I started at CCA 5 years ago, we had a real challenge with governments at all levels to get any acknowledgement of the need of infrastructure, the desire to boost construction, right? It was an afterthought. Construction's always been around. It will be around. They don't need our attention. if you look at the last 2-3 years, governments at all levels have been caring a whole lot about construction. They care about housing infrastructure, they care about trade, they care about workforce. There's been a number of investment and announcement in that regard. And I think now we're at a cool time where we can really, as an industry, step up and say, hey, we matter and we care about what's happening in Canada. If you look at the platform that Mark Carney ran on for his own leadership, there's a lot of language on there in trade enabling infrastructure, on housing infrastructure. If you look at the Poilievre's campaign and the announcement they've been doing for a few months now, they very much care about the housing crisis. They care about how we can build faster and better. If you look at provincial politics, Doug Ford in Ontario was just reelected with a very strong mandate, clearly have desire to invest in infrastructure. So we are at a time where the average Canadian seems to care much more about construction, and politicians are listening. So I'll leave that in a final note. I'm hopeful that the next few weeks throughout the election will be a chance to discuss construction and infrastructure, and hopefully will lead to a new government that will look into what are the challenges ahead and what we can do in that regard. And I can say, and it hasn't been announced yet, but CC will be happy to be part of that discussion. We'll launch our own election campaign on Thursday. Stay tuned for that. And we'll be sure to be front and center throughout the entire election.
So I'm getting a press release on Thursday. That's good knowledge. Yes. But we're kind of right to the wire here. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. If you don't mind, I'll dive into a really quick on question, because one of the things that came up a couple times in our discussions is about the deficit of infrastructure that we have. So it's about maintaining what's there and building what's needed. Perhaps we can go really quick just for like a short answer here. LP, talk to us about are the existing structures in good shape? Like, we've talked a bit about new. Let's talk about the existing. Where do things stand? And
it's chicken and egg scenario. If you look at the Infrastructure Canada report that look at the state of infrastructure, year after year, the category that says we do not know is expanding. People are not saying it's in bad conditions, just the capacity to evaluate is worsening year after year. The reality is that all the discussion we've had on trade infrastructure, on housing infrastructure, it's not so much a question of new versus existing. It all works together. If you build new infrastructure downtown Toronto, you will retrofit infrastructure. You're not going to create new neighborhood. If it's in a city that has more urban sprawl, then you look at the suburban new infrastructure. I think it's all part of that same discussion, but those are challenges that we need to acknowledge are different from one another. Ripping up a street and removing the sewer and water and then putting new one is a very different project, very different cost than building brand new neighborhood. The same is true for our energy grid. The same is true for commerce infrastructure. But I think it's again, chicken and egg. We need to do both. We need to upgrade infrastructure, make sure that the rapidly aging state of infrastructure we have get taken care of, but also look at expanding.
And Lisa, I'll turn to you on this. The opportunities, of course, because our readers are the ones that will be building a lot of this. So, talk about that challenge and opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think, LP sort of, mentioned that we do know that, the infrastructure report cards do show that there is a large degree of infrastructure that is in poor or very poor condition. And that increase in space of don't know, and that asset that really need across Canada for strong asset management programs, I think it is key. I would say, though, that the one thing that I would say is the ones that we do know are working well are those that are availing themselves of a full life cycle P3 project, because that is a performance-based contract. And if it's not working the way it's supposed to, there's significant penalties applied to the private partner. So I would say that there are 300 plus projects in varying forms across the country that are in the P3 portfolio over a 30-year period that are largely going well. There's obviously been some challenges. We don't hear about the wastewater treatment facility that's doing what it's supposed to do, because that doesn't make a good headline. We'll only see in the headlines the ones that might be having some challenges along the way. But even then, I would say that, largely what we're seeing for any of the challenges in the market with the P3 model right now are largely on the construction delivery side and not the O&M side. So it's a bit of a plug for what we do over here, but I do think it's an important thing to note. There are challenges, but we've got ways to help support that in the long term.
Excellent, thank you. And Anil, did you want to weigh in at all? We've got about 30 seconds or so, if that's sorry to cut you short.
Maybe 15, just to reiterate what Lisa said. So yeah, we're focused on greenfield, but that maintenance piece, when you've got a revenue model or an O&M contract, an approach that works, that allows you to actually run these infrastructure projects more sustainably and hopefully avoid that deficit in the future. So that's really where we're focused these days.
Awesome, thank you, and I'd really like to thank all three of you for the insights that you've loaned the industry here, and I think that there is a lot of opportunity coming. It's easy to get into the negative focus of things, but the reality in all of this is opportunity does come from challenges, right? So, and I think we've all three of you have made those points, and hopefully the audience has gotten a lot of good insight going forward. Thank you again. So LP Champagne from CCA, Anil Jaswal of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and Lisa Mitchell of Canada Council for Public-Private Partnerships. I'm so used to just saying P3s. So thank you very much for sharing your time. And just a note to the audience, these three individuals and organizations were gracious enough to make time to help foster this discussion, allowing them to be here today. So thank you, all three of you, and as well to your organizations.
Thank you for
And
having
I'd like
us.
to
Thanks.
thank you. I'd like to also thank our sponsor, LBX Company, for making the webinar possible. We appreciate their support and encourage those of you in attendance to hit their website to check out the link belt lineup of excavators, material handlers, forest machinery, and precision grade machine guidance systems. If you tuned in late to today, don't worry, it's been recorded. You will get a link to the recording, usually within about 24 hours. And this will also get posted to YouTube on OnSite's YouTube channel. It normally takes about a week or so for that to happen. So share the video when it gets posted. I do hope that everybody got some good insight from today's webinar. And again, I'm Adam Freill. I'm the editor of OnSite Magazine, and it's been my pleasure to guide this discussion. Have a safe and productive day, everyone.